All right, so last week I explained that I was going to do a series of talks in 3 parts, all dealing with the idea of contemplative practice. And I mentioned, just by way of review, that people tell me that they come to Buddhist meetings for kind of 3 main reasons. They want peace of mind, so they want to reduce the amount of stress in their life in some way. Or they want to increase happiness. Less stressful emotions are great, but we also want to feel good about life. And finally, people look for a way to connect with the sacred. So they might not use that word specifically, but once we've reduced our stress and start feeling happier, we tend to want to sustain that through seeking a sense of purpose and meaning. So last week I talked about contemplative practice as a way to reduce stress, and I gave you some homework. How many of you did any of it? Oh, good. Well, I had homework too, and I didn't do mine either. So I was going to post some things on their Facebook page to remind you of what practices I had suggested, but my life went off in unexpected directions this week. We had a student athlete pass away at the university, and so as a university chaplain, that responding to that took up a lot of my time, but don't worry. You have a handout you can take with you so you can catch up. It has those practices on it, and it has some things that we're going to do today. So that's why you have that in your hand now. So there's kind of a continuum of practice here. One of the steps in stress reduction through practices like meditation and mindfulness is to let go of thoughts and value systems that lead to stress. But then another side of it is to start developing kind of good replacement values, thoughts and value systems that lead us toward fuller, freer lives. So the values that lead to happiness tend to involve engaging with the world in meaningful ways. And so some of those things will put us in touch with what you might call the sacred. So today the focus is on happiness. Transcending stress and cultivating happiness go hand in hand, but they're a little bit different in some significant ways. So before we talk about how to be happy, I want to talk a little bit about why we might want to be happy. Once in a while, and I think the Dalai Lama mentioned this in his book, that in the reading that Rita just did. Somebody will tell me I have a hard time wanting happiness for myself. It can seem selfish or whatever to want happiness for yourself. But you can't find the resources to help others if you don't have the resources to create your own happiness. It's also important to spiritual progress. If we can't experience some joy, we have a tough time experiencing awe and other things that come with experiencing the sacred. And the Buddha recognized this. There's a discourse where he was talking to a monk about enlightenment, about the 7 factors of enlightenment. He said these factors, when cultivated and much developed, are conducive to full realization, mindfulness, investigation of the Dharma, energy, happiness, calm, concentration, and equanimity. So most of you probably didn't come here expecting to walk out enlightened, but happiness has some very practical benefits as well. Psychologists have found that cultivating certain positive emotions actually reverses some of the physical effects of stress, resulting in longer, healthier life. So that meditation that I guided you in a little earlier, where you were bringing your attention to your heart, that actually has been shown somewhat to stimulate the vagus nerve. And that stimulating the vagus nerve improves all kinds of things that relate to stress, and improves digestion, and there's some suggestion that it can actually lower your risk of heart disease and that kind of thing. But also happy people tend to be more emotionally resilient. So when bad things happen, they tend to suffer less. When we feel good emotionally, we tend to be more creative and to find more meaning in life. And so the pursuit of happiness is not really a selfish endeavor. When we develop the mental states that are most associated with happiness, we tend to feel more connected to others. And when we feel more connected with one another, we have more empathy, we tend to treat other people better. So in fact, the qualities that lead to happiness outside of mindfulness and concentration that we talked about last week mainly have to do with how we relate to other people. And we're going to work with this a little bit today. We're going to look at three main areas of practice: forgiveness, gratitude, and kindness. So before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about what I mean when I say happiness. When you're reading about Buddhism, you'll see sometimes that the idea that true happiness is generally considered in terms of total liberation. And that's often presented as something that's mainly experienced by people who live a monastic life. But the Buddha said that there are other very legitimate forms of happiness that we can seek, the kind of happiness that's experienced by people with homes and families and jobs and all of those things. So I like to think of happiness as being a kind of state of mental being that is generally pleasant, with a preponderance of positive emotions, and that's sustainable, renewable, and even kind of self-promoting. So in other words, happiness should feel good. It should be resilient enough that when something bad happens, we can feel appropriately about that, but return to feeling good reasonably quickly. So think about it as being like in good health. You might still get the flu or have an accident, so you might get sick or injured, but if you're healthy, you return fairly quickly in most cases. Also, if you're in good health, you're more likely to have healthy habits. And so good health tends to kind of, you're going to age and all those things are going to happen, but if you're in good health, you tend to remain in good health more than if you're not in good health. So similarly, happiness, if you think of that in terms of kind of spiritual health, should make it possible to endure periods of trouble, and it should lead to more happiness. So it should feel good emotionally and physically, but it's also good for us, not just as individuals, but if we're happy, it's healthier for the circumstances that we live in. So unlike something like drugs or drinking, which can also produce positive emotions, happiness generally supports our family and our social life and even our community, which is important because that's where we thrive or we don't. So I promised you last week that I was going to talk less this week and that I would give you a chance to do a little bit more. So I want to do that now. I want to let you practice something that most people say leads to an improved overall sense of well-being. So on that handout, there's a gratitude practice. And it says to write down 3 things that have gone well for you today. In other words, think of it as kind of naming 3 gifts that you've received so far today. Now, I'll go first if you want to give you an idea. I got to think about this. My coffee pot worked perfectly this morning and gave me 2 really good cups of coffee. I did not get behind any slow drivers this morning. Everyone drove orderly and well. And I have a service assistant here who helps make sure that what I'm going to talk about is all framed in a way to make it especially good. So now you try. So as people are finishing up, anybody finished want to share what they came up with? Yeah.
I have a new dog, and today she did not pee in the hall.
So she gave you freedom from urine. Excellent.
Good one.
Okay, great. Yes.
My dogs pooped when I took them outside.
Okay, gave you feces in the right place. How about you?
My dogs let me sleep. I'm sensing a theme here.
Anybody who doesn't have dogs?
I felt a lot better walking this morning, and also increased that walk with my neighbor to a little bit longer.
And her dog.
No. Well, yeah, the neighbor's dog, that's right.
I have the sound system works right away.
Okay, so the sound system gave you amplification instantly. That's great.
And there are still a lot of people here today, even though it's Labor Day weekend.
Yeah.
So thankful for them.
I saw bald eagles.
Oh, nice. Nice.
That's a gift. Heart time and the safe arms of John.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Heart time and the safe arms of John.
Okay.
Heart.
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 Yeah. Yeah.
Saw a beautiful sunrise on the back of my Miss Lily boat this morning on the St. John's, and had a loving send-off with my neighbors who were on their way to Houston.
Cool.
And Skyped with my lovely daughter Summer on my iPhone.
So let me ask you just kind of generally, how do you feel after doing that? Yeah. All right, good. So usually people report, this has been studied over a period of 6 months to a year, and researchers report that if you just take time at the end of the day to write down about 3 reasons you have for gratitude, or 3 things that went well for you, you're going to tend to, over time, improve your sense of well-being. So let me give you some homework, and it's on the thing, so you don't have to remember this. If you want to increase your sense of gratitude, take a day, and every time you say thank you to someone, say thank you for the specific thing that you're thanking them for. So somebody opens the door for you at the store, don't just say thanks and walk through. Say thank you for opening the door for me. It seems like such a simple thing, but what I experience myself and what I hear from a lot of other people is taking that little moment to be aware of what it is that has been done on your behalf increases its value to you. So we don't often think of contemplative practice in terms of doing stuff. It generally, you say contemplative practice and people think of sitting on a cushion contemplating your navel or something like that. But really, contemplation is an active process. Gratitude journaling is something that you do, for example. So when you're doing something and being aware of how your mind is engaging with whatever's going on, then that's contemplation. So let me take things in a little different direction here, just to give you another way of looking at a point that I want to consider.
Teacher, I have the wrong paper, I think, because I'm trying to find
Turn it over.
Turn it over.
Oh, there you go. Thank you. I'm thankful for it.
That's good. So those of you in my generation may recall when President Jimmy Carter made a statement that he had sinned. He said he had lusted in his heart. And that got some laughs from a lot of people because I think to the average American, lusting in your heart is pretty low on the sin seriousness scale. And most Buddhists tend not to talk very much about sin at all because it implies judgment. Some deity or other being kind of looks at what you do and pronounces you a sinner, and we're not really into that. But think about this term anyway, because it's pretty direct. What if we were to define sin as an action that leads to suffering for someone? So we might go a little further and say that sinful action tends to lead to more sin, because if we're observant, we'll see that willfully engaging in something that causes suffering tends to lead to more suffering. So most people probably don't think that something is really harmful unless we do it physically. But the Buddha said that there were actions of body, speech, and mind. So we're going to talk a little bit more about actions of speech later. But let's look at actions of mind. Can something that only happens in the mind be, as President Carter said, a sin. Well, think about this idea of lusting in one's heart. There's a difference between a thought, which is a mental phenomenon, and thinking, which is an action that produces more mental phenomena and potentially generates actions of speech and body. So thoughts arise. Now, I don't know what Carter was actually talking about, but let's say that he saw an attractive woman and a sexual thought came into his mind, or maybe a physical sensation. Now, those are not sins. To use a Buddhist idea, those are not bad karma. We can't control what arises into our awareness any more than we can control who steps into a crosswalk in front of our car when we're stopped at a light. But suppose you're sitting in your car, waiting for the light to change, and someone you really don't like, somebody you're not getting along with at work or something like that, steps into the crosswalk in front of your car. That's not your doing, right? But suppose you hit the gas and give them a little bump. That's yours. You own that. So all kinds of thoughts arise in our minds, and that's not our doing. Whether we keep our foot on our middle brake or whether we let our minds run amok, that's ours. We own that. So I don't know what Carter did. If lustful thoughts arose and he let them go, there's no sin involved. And if he, well, I don't want to go any farther with this. My point is, if you want to develop a happier mind, you practice happier actions. So what we do, what we nurture is going to grow. So when stressful thoughts arise, when we let them go, they tend not to expand. If we deliberately do good things, then our ways of thinking more happily grows. So to cultivate gratitude like we just did increases our overall sense of well-being and thus our happiness, because we're cultivating a positive emotion. In the past, psychologists tended to see positive emotion as sort of symptoms of happiness. If you were joyful, it's because you were happy. But in the last few decades, scientists have started to realize something the Buddha talked about 2,500 years ago. Positive emotions actually cause happiness. They're not a consequence of it. Emotions result from the mind's interaction with things that happen. And so you can train your mind to interact with your reality in more positive ways. Among the actions of mind that increase happiness is a tough one for a lot of people. It's forgiveness. And I realized as I was outlining my thoughts for this talk that I have never given a talk here about forgiveness. I'm going to remedy that situation sometime in the next few months, so I'm not going to go into it too deeply now. It's a real gift when I'm working on one thing and I realize that there's a whole other topic I need to look at. But there's a practice in your handout that you can try. And it's a challenging subject. Don't expect it to come easy. But besides gratitude, kindness is probably the next most powerful happiness-producing practice. So I want us to do another exercise. And this will only take a minute or so. And you don't have to write anything down. Just think for a minute and recall a kindness that someone has done for you recently. Doesn't have to be a big deal. Just something nice that someone did for you. And focus on that for a minute. And notice how you feel as you relive this kindness. And now, think of someone else in your life, somebody that you like, and wish for them to receive a similar kindness. You can just kind of imagining someone doing that thing for them, and notice how that feels when you do that. So would anyone like to tell me about the kindness that you experienced? Okay.
A neighbor loaned us device that they could put through a hole in the wall to look at the inside of the wall, and he had never used it. So he loaned it to us, brandy new, because we had a leak in the wall and we were trying to find it.
How did it feel when you thought about that?
Well, I was pleased and touched that he was willing to loan us something he'd never used before.
Yes. Anybody else? Yes.
The kindness that Annie has shown me through the years and the help that she has given me.
And I can say the same, and Peggy buys me a lottery ticket every week.
I saw a movement over.
Yeah, 3 weeks ago, we were at the vet and had to make a decision to put down one of our cats. And just the way that the vet and the vet technician were extremely compassionate, and the vet actually hugged me, and that was really kind.
We had a washing machine burn up, and I went to the thrift store and bought a washer and dryer, and they were too heavy for me to unload off the truck. So the gentleman that mows our lawn was kind enough to agree to come over and help me unload those, because Dawn and I just couldn't do it on our own, and I didn't want either one of us to get hurt. And I had Dawn in my mind, I would pay this man $20, even though he initially said I'll come over and do it for nothing. And but I didn't tell him $20. When we got over there, I said, I want to pay for this, and he said $10 would be fine. And I said, well, it's worth every bit of the $20. And we compromised at 15. But in this world where it just seems we're so greed-driven, there's such a connection between the power of what we think money will buy in terms of happiness.
Sure.
That was a really kind deed, and I try to practice that in my life often too.
I saw another hand.
Well, we were up in the mountains on vacation. My neighbor, who is politically as on the opposite side of the world as I am, came over to my house and rebuilt a portion of my deck that had deteriorated.
Wow.
And received would not take anything for his efforts. He did it on his own, and I'll tell you what, I have never been more grateful.
That's cool. That's cool. So I'm going to assume or suggest that probably most of you felt pretty good as you were recalling these kindnesses that were done to you, right, for you. Actually, re-experiencing a kindness tends to make you happier, but also it tends to make you more likely to be kind. And when you hear about a kindness from someone else, that also makes you more likely to be kind. So I just made you all kind of people. You're welcome. So both forgiveness and kindness operate on the basis of compassion. And this is one of the most important principles in Buddhism. The Dalai Lama said that in the reading that we heard earlier. He said the greatest happiness comes from the development of love and compassion. And he goes on to say that not only humans, but the smaller forms of life, like insects and rodents and things like that, without any religion, without law, without education, survive through mutual cooperation and recognition of interdependence. So I'm going to talk more about things like interdependence and meaning next week. But for now, I want us to do another exercise. So on your sheet, there's a group recitation. It's the metta prayer. So before we do it, I want to just tell you a little bit about it. Venerable Kai Tien includes this in his liturgy for the weekly service at White Sands Buddhist Center. And after I started going there, people said positive things about this. So I started including it in our meetings in DeLand too. And since then, people have started coming to me saying, I'm more compassionate now, or I'm calmer, I'm responding more kindly to difficult people and stuff, just since we started reciting this thing. And to be honest, this surprised me a little bit, because a lot of these people have done meditations to generate loving kindness and to deal with compassion many times. And they've all heard me talk about it a lot. But doing that actually kind of helped them kind of get it on sort of a visceral level. And so it occurred to me that actions of body, speech, and mind are very closely related. And so practicing one affects the others. So just like coming to church and singing a hymn together tends to make you feel a certain way and inspire you in certain ways, there's something powerful about saying powerful words. They resonate in our awareness, and so doing this can transform us. So I want us to do this together. I'll just start. It's kind of, you just sort of recite it in kind of a sing-songy way, and you just jump in when you get the urge. May I be happy and well, may no harm come to me, may I learn compassion, may all my friends, family, and those I love be happy and well, may no harm come to them, may they learn compassion. May all those troubled in body, mind, and spirit be happy and well. May no harm come to them. May they learn compassion. May all those who have hurt me in body, mind, and spirit be happy and well. May no harm come to them. May they learn compassion. May all those I have hurt in body, mind, and spirit be happy and well. May no harm come to them. May they learn compassion. May all my enemies be happy and well. May no harm come to them. May they learn compassion. May all living beings be happy and well. May no harm come to them. May they learn compassion. In worshiping together and reciting prayers, great blessings are accumulated. We dedicate these blessings to all ancestors of this spiritual community, all beings in all realms, all those in suffering and sorrow. We further dedicate this merit to the peace of the world, the peace of this congregation, the strength and sound practice of its members, to the restoration and health of the natural world, its waters, plants, and creatures, and to all efforts in its service with gratitude. With all our love, with all our spirits, and with all our might, inviting misery and suffering no foothold, we vow to accomplish the way. May all creations in all realms of existence swiftly accomplish the Buddha way together.